Welcome back into the Sports Source, this segment of our show brought to you by A.G. Hines Company. Summer's about to wind down, and soon the weather's going to cool. That means now is the perfect time to finish that home improvement project you're working on. A.G. Hines Company is the perfect company to turn to. They have all the materials and tools you need at better prices than a lot of the national chain stores, and they give you personal instructions that you need to do the job right. They've been doing it for 100 years, literally, since 1920. A.G. Hines Company, that's all I need to say every week. Just, they've been doing it 100 years. That tells you how good a company is. This is their fourth generation that's now working at A.G. Hines Company. That's unbelievably rare. Get down and see them or check them out online or call them right there on that phone number, A.G. Hines Company. All right, let's take a look here at Tennessee's 10 foes. Now, this is alphabetical order. We don't know when the teams will play. There will be an open date thrown in as well. But Alabama at well, your home games, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Missouri, and you add Texas A&M. Your road games at Arkansas, at Georgia, at Carolina, at Vanderbilt, and you add Auburn, where Jeremy Pruitt got his first big win, actually. Overall thoughts on, and we'll get into likely wins, likely losses, but overall thoughts, you got 5 top 15, top 13 teams on that schedule. Thoughts on how that looks. And I tell you what, I'm going to throw our director here. Let's come on back to us. We'll go to the graphic in a second.
Well, I think in general, I'm looking at the away schedule there going, hey, you got favorable home and away right there because, I mean, you're playing 3 teams you think you would beat away and only 2 that you're challenged. So, I mean, if you look at your home and away, you're looking, you've got an advantageous approach there that you've got, you know, you didn't add the 2 hardest games and a lot of games away from your place. So I look at that and say there's a benefit there. And then you see a lot of winnable games on there that you can play, that you can be with this year. I think it's going to be real interesting how they structure when you're playing these games. Because if it's a money grab, I'm going to push all the better games to the front of the season, right? I'm going to push as many of them early on. So when we look at that, when do you start playing these other teams? Because as the season goes on, if you play this whole season, the more than likely when people are going to have big names drop off for sickness or whatever is going to be later and later in the year that I could run into an Alabama that's decimated. And so if I'm looking at this, I'm not only looking now and go, okay, away I'm looking okay, and now just tell me when I'm playing one of these guys. And I could start looking at a more favorable situation in my eyes when I see that.
There's nothing normal about this year. If there is a playoff, there's no that's not going to be a normal selection process trying to judge who's better, which conference is better. But another thing that usually goes into this, if you have a loss, better to have it early and then go on a win streak and everybody forgets about it. Because you drop further that week you lose. Even if the playoff committee's saying, oh no, that's not how we're going to do it. Yes, that's exactly how they do it. That's just how the human mind works. Whoever lost last gets the toughest blow. So that's another argument for you may see the Alabamas and the Georgias play early as opposed to late so they can get that out of the way. Your thoughts on what you saw there, that 10-game schedule?
Yeah, partly I want to know how do the big opponents, the other 4, kind of line up around Alabama, because playing Alabama is such a physical game. You have 2 tough West opponents added. That's how I would have wanted it, though, in terms of Auburn on the road, because as you mentioned, John, Tennessee's won there. It was a couple years ago. A lot of these guys would have been on that team, or at least would have experienced part of it, and they're going to have confidence going there. A&M, I think, is going to be a pretty tough team, mature quarterback. They come to your place. It's kind of funny, not funny, but A&M finally comes to Knoxville. Their fans may not be able to make that trip that they would have looked forward to. But, yeah, how it kind of circles around Alabama for the schedule, because that's going to be such a physical game.
David?
Yeah, I think it's – the interesting thing about where Tennessee's at is the list of games that they can't win is quickly shrinking. Like, you look back to 2018, you're like, man, there's a handful of these games on here that Tennessee just has no shot to win. Well, now this year it's pretty much only Georgia and Alabama, and I wouldn't even say those would qualify because you look at Georgia, all this offseason they've had a ton of new personnel, a new offense, a new quarterback, 2 new quarterbacks, you know, JT Daniels and Jamie Newman that are going to be competing. And then, of course, Alabama, and then, of course, the looming sort of variable in all this is what is your personnel situation like when those games happen? Nobody's going to know. So, you know, as tough as the schedule is, Tennessee, you know, it's a difficult schedule, but Tennessee does have some opportunities to, if you can stay healthy and if you can keep your, you know, your situation under wraps, you know, or not under wraps, but under control, you know, you can win some ball games. So it's a tough schedule, but Tennessee, their roster is built to the point where, you know, they don't have the depth that they would like, but they've got some players to be able to win some ball games.
Well, let me show you, in terms of Tennessee's strength of schedule compared to the other teams in the SEC. Again, just looking at last year's SEC win totals, I added them up all 10 opponents for each of the 14 schools. Arkansas is the toughest schedule. We got 49 wins among their 10 opponents, 49 SEC wins. Vanderbilt, South Carolina, second toughest. Missouri, Auburn. Alabama, of the big boys, has the tougher schedule. Now, they're in the West Division, so that's going to play into that. But you look down there, Tennessee, 11th, 38 wins against their 10. That's not that bad. So when you look at who they added, you go, oh, we got the shaft. Yeah, but overall, you already had Arkansas. You already had Vanderbilt, who are the two dregs this year. Only LSU, Georgia, and Florida have it easier. Unfortunately, that's two of the teams in your division. But I don't think anyone in their right mind was counting on this being an SEC championship game type season for Tennessee in the first place. Does that change your view at all when you look at it that way? I mean, you can look at it. We've got 5 top 15 teams, 5 top 15 teams on our schedule. Or you can look at it and say, yeah, but compared to everybody else in SEC wins, it's not that bad. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's why I think the SEC should have just
Done it like
released.
this.
Yeah, they should have released the entire list of opponents, not just the two, because like Alabama, you see there with more wins from last year on the schedule. If you see who Alabama plays and who Tennessee plays, just to compare those two, if you rank each division, Alabama is playing the number 1, number 3, number 4 teams in the East. Tennessee's playing the number 1, number 3, number 4 teams in the West. It actually lines up more closely than you would think. One difference would be Tennessee is Tennessee, Alabama's Bama, so Bama's better. The opponents don't look as tough as compared to Tennessee. But in terms of how the schedules line up, it's actually much more even than people would think.
Right.
I'm still looking if I'm Missouri, Vanderbilt,
tough.
and those guys. I have been tied to the stake and just led as lamb to slaughter because there is no doubt with that being the case. I mean, Arkansas, you can say they're in the West, so you didn't have to do too much to make their schedule harder. But if I'm in the East, in Vanderbilt, Missouri, I clearly see where I've been set up to fail in this season.
Yeah, tough draw for Sam Pittman at Arkansas too. I like that Arkansas released a statement like right after the schedule dropped. They were talking about this is the most challenging schedule in college football history. I don't find anyone arguing that point. Best of luck to the Hawks.
Yeah, I don't
here.
often believe in year zeros, but for Sam Pittman, for Eli Drinkwitz, I would argue a year zero here.
Yeah,
for sure.
and we've debated this on the show the last couple. I think this is a mulligan year if there ever was one. Anyway, there are going to be some fire-breathing fans, and there are going to be some shock jock media people who whip it up and act like, no, this is like a normal year. It's not. How much credit do you give Jeremy Pruitt if he beats Alabama and Alabama doesn't have an offensive line due to COVID? How much blame do you put on Jeremy Pruitt if they lose to Florida and they don't have any quarterbacks on the Tennessee roster due to COVID? It's an absolute mulligan year, and for that reason, I look at it and think, if you're going to have a year like this, where the schedule is tough, this is the year to do it. And there could be some positives from that. We'll discuss that a little bit later. When we come back, though, which are the likeliest wins? Let's rank Tennessee's opponents 1 to 10 in terms of likely wins, likely losses. We'll build toward what a good season would be with that schedule, and then we'll debate whether or not that what we view as a good season would be acceptable to the masses. Come on back on the Sports World.